Hello, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond. My name is Taylor. Welcome to the brand new isometric turn-based RPG from Fool's Theory, published by 11-Bit Studios and released on Steam, as well as most other consoles outside of the Switch, today, the Thaumaturge. Now, for full disclosure, I was given a review package through Keymailer, so thank you very much to Keymailer and 11-Bit Studios for the review package. As always, I will not let that affect my opinions or views of the game, but I do want to disclose that I got it for free through Keymailer, so thank you again to both of them. Unfortunately, because I did get it so close to release, and I had some other things on my plate at the time, I was not able to put as much time into the game as I would like before release. Therefore, this video will be covering the prologue, which did a great job at introducing the mechanics and took me about an hour and a half, which I think is pretty reasonable. I will be releasing a later video when I have a better informed opinion with my honest thoughts of the game as well as the mechanics. At the time of recording, this game retails for the price you're going to see on screen because unfortunately I don't have the price available to me quite yet, as it is in pre-order status, but does not give me a price range for any system. So keep that in mind as I go through this video. Also keep in mind that what I have is the closest to full release build that was available at the time, and it will have some bugs that the developers are well aware of and have promised to have fixed by the time of full release. So what the product you get will be ever so slightly different from the product I received. However, during the prologue, I did not encounter any bugs to really concern me. So with all that being said, let's start with the story. You play as Victor, with a W, not a V, who was born in Warsaw, and is a Thaumaturge, who are people who deal in miracles. This comes from the Greek word for miracle, thauma, which the game describes before letting you in. It starts off with him reading a letter from his sister Ligia, who speaks of his illness and how you are seeking a healer in this small village in Poland. Now, we aren't told what his sickness is, so it's very mysterious. Keep in mind that this all takes place in 1905, which was a very polarizing time for Poland and just, well, I mean, all of Europe in general, but Poland especially had a lot of changes going on around this time historically. So when you arrive at the train station, the station master basically expositions about the actual state of Poland historically at the time, being split between three larger nations, which does include Russia. And based on the events after the prologue and actual history, I have a feeling this setting in time will play a large role in the story, but I have not fully experienced that yet, so I cannot say for sure. Once you head into the small village, you are affronted by some drunken ruffians, which kicks off your first combat encounter, but I'll address that in a later section. After beating them up, but not killing them, I want to stress that, you enter the tavern to find the healer, a devout man of God himself, Rasputin. Now, if you don't know Rasputin, please Google his name, because he's a super interesting figure in Russian history. After speaking with him, he asks you to prove that you're Thaumaturge, which you do by identifying items that belong to him through a series of different senses. I'm going to break down really roughly and really badly just what a Thaumaturge is. Basically, what they do is they read emotions and thoughts from objects based on, the person that owned them, the person that would use them on a regular basis, because in theory, these emotions, these thoughts that we had when using this item kind of come through, or the emotional state we were in when we were using it. So the Thaumaturge is able to read those thoughts and emotions from that person and kind of get a better sense for who they are, as well as later on influencing their thoughts, which is kind of creepy, now that I say it out loud. After you investigate the objects in the world, you return to him to kind of prove, that you are who you say you are, or rather, what you say you are. Now, this is probably a good time for me to introduce a portion of the skill tree, not the whole thing, because part of it does relate to combat, and we'll get there later. So, the skill tree is broken down into 4 different branches, or dimensions, as the game calls them, known as heart, mind, deeds, and words. These relate to the emotions, thoughts, actions, and words, would you believe, of the person respectively. These have an impact on more than just the investigations, but I'll keep that within the scope for now. Having the required number of points in each dimension will not only give you more flavor text, but also more XP when looking at one of these interactable objects, and open up dialogue options when speaking to relevant NPCs, meaning you'll have a lot more options when investigating a situation or how you want to handle it. This will be indicated to you by having the speech options locked away and telling you need to investigate further to open them up. It was nice to see that they made it known to the player that, hey, there is something you're missing here, so you don't just have to kind of wander around in circles like, did I miss something? Did I mess something up? You can see, okay, there is something I am missing here. Another aspect of this, interestingly enough, is you can decide what to tell certain NPCs, like how much information you want to give to them. And some of the major ones, such as Rasputin, will remember that, meaning that your choices may have, an impact, may have weight in terms of managing the relations with other characters, but I have not gotten far enough in the game to see that or kind of see how your decisions influence, how they view Victor. Now, this was an interesting introduction to the system because 3 of the 4 items of Rasputin's I could not look into because I did not invest in the relevant skill. My first level up I put into Heart because that is the skill branch, dimension, whatever you want to call it, that Victor starts out with. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to put a little more in Heart. But then it said, hey, to investigate this, you need at least 1 level of Deed, or 1 level of Word, or 1 level of Mind. And I was like, okay, clearly the game is not looking for you to kind of slot into one tree. It wants you to kind of branch out and maybe not keep them all equal at all times, but try to keep them relatively balanced so that you can, investigate a larger number of things. Though I do imagine and cannot confirm that later on in the game you'll find objects that would require you to more heavily invest in one tree than another, meaning you may lock yourself out of certain evidence based on the trees you choose, which would be an interesting choice because at the end of the day, the best choice in games is one where the player has full control, but also suffers the consequences of those choices. Now, I understand some people may argue, oh, I didn't know that, this was going to be the case. And it's like, I understand that. And you can always do a second playthrough to go back and change something to make sure you get whatever evidence or thing that you missed out on. That's the fun of exploring. That's the fun of making these choices. You lock yourself out of other possibilities. And it doesn't feel cheap, like it doesn't force you to do anything. You're just like, oh, if this is the path you choose to go down, great. You're going to get all of this and miss out on all of this, meaning you can come back to it later. Now, after Rasputin agrees to help you, he puts you in a trance-like state where you enter this dream. Now, we not only see our father, but a creature known as a salutor in this kind of dream-like state. And we realize that this creature, the salutor, must be living somewhere in the village. We know this because all of the villagers seem really on edge and were willing to fight you at the drop of a hat. So clearly something is going on. One of the main components of the game seems to be these salutors, which are also known as, angels, demons, or imps in other cultures, and they attach themselves to someone's flaw. For example, Victor has his umpir, as he calls it, which is attached to his flaw of pride that he's admitted to multiple times. And they're kind of used like Pokemon in a sense, but we'll get there. It's interesting because in dialogue options, you have the choice to lean into these flaws and make them stronger. Meaning you can act prideful, you can be, a bit of a jerk, or you can choose not to. It will always indicate like, hey, this is leaning into a flaw. And the more you use it, the stronger it gets, meaning you might make more and more, bold decisions, or you might make more and more choices that would be seen as prideful, or that would be seen as what other flaws we're able to take on. Meaning that you have a lot of choice, again, there's that word, in how you want to build out Victor's personality using these flaws, because you will acquire more as the game goes on, and you can decide where you really want to heavily invest in any of them, none of them, or maybe all of them. And I really hope this leads down some really interesting branching paths. After you awake, you are assigned 2 quests. One to find Rasputin, who went to the cemetery, and the other to find the source of the flaw in the village, but the game makes a point of telling you that you can tackle the quests in any order, and if you get stuck on one, another quest might hold the key. So I stuck around the village and investigated the clues lying around, and got used to my first Jedi mind tricks. One of them being the extrasensory perception that you can activate via right-clicking. The game does have controller support, but I'll get into that in just a little bit. However, I did use mouse and keyboard, hence my really weird running, and the constant, you'll see a flash on screen of red, and, the surrounding area goes kind of black and white. That is because I'm using my senses to detect objects I can investigate. You can also use collected salutors to influence people based on the certain dimensions that they belong to into kind of doing what you want. This helped me settle a dispute between 2 peasants and opened up the wise woman as someone to talk to. which is where I encountered some of the locked dialogue options. It was then that I decided to go look at the cemetery because I realized I think I've done everything that I can in the village. Once there, we learn that he is praying for a village elder who was burned to death in his own home, and we learn of the introduction of the Bukovac, as they called it. So we realize this Bukovac and the salutor that we are chasing are one and the same. And so we immediately asked to investigate the elder's burned home. Once there, after some more combat, I explored the homestead and I investigated, and thankfully, based on what had happened with Rasputin the first time, I had invested at least 1 point in each dimension, which proved very useful because there were a lot of items that really told an interesting story. Turns out he was an abusive man who physically abused his daughter for years and was a really well-known drunkard. After discussing this with Rasputin, we returned to the village and I was able to speak to the wise woman again. This led me to one, and then more of the dialogue options being open because I had more information and more evidence. This then revealed the whole story. He was an abusive drunkard, and one of the women from the village went to the wise woman to curse her father in hopes that he would stop. When that didn't work, they burned down his home with him inside. This is when her flaw of rage and resentment attracted the salutor and attached itself to her, thus causing the entire village to be caught up in this, seething rage and anger that caused them to throw down at the drop of a hat. When you confront her about this, it actually creates your first boss fight, which again, I'll talk a little more in detail very shortly. And your goal with this fight is to not only take her flaw, but take her salutor, which is interesting to me. It almost felt a little bit like Pokemon, more like Pokemon Rangers than like an actual Pokemon, trainer, because you're not looking to collect them all. You're just looking to collect certain ones that you're going to kind of use, understanding that you're taking a massive hit to your body and your mental state when you do this. It also reminded me of Blue Dragon, that really old JRPG, where you use a series of monsters as like blue shadows to fight for you. I guess a better comparison would really be the Persona series and how you use demons to fight for you, but I just wanted an excuse to mention Blue Dragon because that's such an old game that popped into my memories because of this, so thank you guys for that. I really appreciate it. Upon defeating the boss, you claim not only her flaw, but her salutor, and then you set out to leave because you got what you needed and then some. The station master then hands you a letter informing of your father's death, which derails any plans you had, thus forcing you to return home and bury him. Rasputin decides to accompany you as you board the train. The prologue ends with the title card. So I know that was a lot, but this is a really story-rich RPG, and that's where the focus lies. So I wanted to do it justice and honestly kind of, get everything out there for you. Now, I think the story setup is okay. I have a feeling it'll expand a lot more in Warsaw, which I have not arrived in at the time of recording. I do wonder if there will be a big bad at the end of it all, or if Rasputin will betray Victor, or if it'll be a series of like smaller stories and complex investigations that could, lead to a series of different outcomes and just kind of be their own contained stories. Honestly, my hope is for the third option because they can all have a start and a conclusion with branching paths, depending on what flaws you lean into, and I think that would just be a better way of going about it because it gives you more freedom to not have to tie everything together, not have to explain the overarching events, and just have it be a series of, hey, I solved your problem in, just a really interesting investigation game. But I look forward to seeing, kind of where it goes in the future, and I will make sure I do a video on this in the future because I really want to know. However, this one's not quite done. You know what else isn't quite done is my channel. I'm putting out a couple extra videos this month, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but for someone who releases trying for 3 videos monthly, adding at least 2 more, plus the stuff that I've got going on in my personal life, takes a toll. So I would really appreciate it if you like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. I know it's bad to shill for this kind of stuff, but I do genuinely want to grow this channel so I can have more opportunities to review games like this, so I can have more opportunities to showcase artists or get more people on the podcast. I do this for fun, I do this as a passion, and I understand I'm not going to do it, for the rest of my life, and I'm not making money off of this, but your subscribe does mean a lot to me, so thank you. Alright, let's fight, let's get into combat. So, the combat that I've been neglecting for a little while now is a turn-based affair with the turn order on the top of the screen, and, kind of which series of attacks are going to happen, because they do vary in the time they take to prepare and perform both yours and the enemy's. This means that some of your attacks can be performed multiple times, before the enemy has a chance to move, and you might even be able to take them out of the fight before they can do anything. Your health, as well as theirs, is displayed below their feet, including what's known as a focus meter. Now, the focus meter is just like a circle that you use, or a series of circles for you that you use to do special moves. You know, like the bigger the move, the more focus it uses. But then they also have a focus meter that kind of blocks some of your larger moves. So you have to first remove that focus from them using a special ability to be able to use some of your strongest attacks. Now, you have kind of fast attacks, prepared attacks, slow attacks, and strong attacks, which all vary in power. Your fast attacks are understandably quick and, you know, don't take much time to prepare. However, they do less damage. Your slow attacks do more damage, but don't necessarily affect concentration. Your prepared attacks are usually something more of like a special ability, and then your strong attacks are what you can use to deal massive damage if the enemy has had their focus broken. Now, you can do this in a couple ways. Like I said, one of the prepared skills is breaking the enemy's focus. Or there are other modifiers that you can get from the skill tree that I haven't talked about that I'm going to bring up right now. The other component of the skill tree, outside of, you know, giving you more points in a specific dimension, is that they unlock modifiers which can be applied to your attack cards. Now, as far as I can tell, I can only equip one modifier to one attack card at a time, and certain attack cards will have, you know, like 1 rank, or 2 ranks, or 3 ranks, meaning they could probably hold a higher rank modifier. Now, every skill that I've looked at, or every, you know, level up that I've looked at, does come with a combat modifier, meaning that you're not only getting a point for that, you know, branch of the skill tree, you are getting another modifier to swap between at any time. These modifiers can be really important because they give your, you know, skills a variety of different effects that can really change how you fight in combat. For example, I put an effect on my quick, you know, fast punch that helped break an enemy's concentration so that I wasn't using up a whole turn just to break 1 point of concentration. I can do damage, weaken their concentration, do damage, and break their concentration by hitting them twice, which then cancels out their attack and allows me to use a strong attack on some of the weaker enemies. Some of the stronger ones, this strategy didn't quite work, but it was really interesting to me to see how differently I played when I unlocked that modifier. Farther down the tree, you are also able to unlock new attack cards themselves, meaning that your deck is going to grow and grow and grow the farther down the skill tree you go. In addition to that, I don't know if they're all called here, or if that's just the name for the one you own, but all of your salutors are able to help you in combat. Now, I believe it is only one at a time, but I have not entered combat since receiving the second one, so I cannot confirm. However, when I did enter combat with only a single salutor, it was a great help because it had its own deck of attack cards. Now, there are only about 4, so the things it could do were limited, but it could leech life, it could break concentration, it could do a number of other things, including a strong attack, which means if I had broken the concentration with Victor, then it could have gone in and done its strong attack, or vice versa. If it breaks the concentration, I can go in with Victor and do a strong attack. So that, again, you likely have to swap whoever your active salutor is for combat, but before every combat encounter, it gives you the option to swap out any, you know, modifiers or cards and really spec for that particular combat encounter. Now, I did play on the balanced, like, normal difficulty. I found the combat was a little bit challenging in the second encounter because there were 3 enemies, one of whom was certainly stronger, and I didn't prioritize them the way I should have. But all in all, I didn't find it an unreasonable level of difficulty, and I think I would recommend the balanced or normal kind of difficulty level, especially if you're not really used to turn-based combat like I am, because I'm really not. So now that we've talked about kind of the regular combat, let's get into the boss fight. Now, the boss fight was interesting because you're basically fighting shadow people created by the boss, as well as the boss itself, but you can't attack the boss directly. You can't attack the salutor directly. You attack the shadows that it makes, and then it takes damage on a collective basis from those shadows, whereas each one of those shadows has their own health bar, meaning when you defeat one, another one is summoned, which may have a different attack pattern, meaning what moves you decide to use may have to change because suddenly the shadow is using a different attack pattern than what you were used to. Now, the other thing is the salutor itself did get attacks in, and it hit like a truck. Like, honestly, I wasn't too concerned about the small little shadows that it summoned, and admittedly, they were able to attack quicker, which makes sense. The salutor always kind of went at the end of the turn order, but it hit really hard, and I did come close to dying at the end, even with my salutor's healing ability. It was a bit of a mix-up, but not as much as I would have cared for, and I'm really hoping that future boss fights and future salutor fights are a little different, because if it is just this same combat every single time, I do think that'll get a little repetitive and a little stale. I understand that this is, a big story-driven, investigation-driven game, and that it's very specifically designed for you to have fun with those parts, and I appreciate that. I absolutely do, and I think that's what will carry this game. But if there's, a whole bunch of combat and it just feels very repetitive and the boss fights feel very repetitive, that is going to hinder the overall quality of the game. And that's why, again, I'm kind of hoping for self-contained stories, because then it would allow you to introduce a new mechanic, explore that mechanic for the story, maybe even introduce a new mechanic into the boss fight, and then you could either carry that through into another story or leave it behind, and you're not going to get bogged down with all this stuff and all these ideas that may not make a more interesting boss fight or just may cause bloat. I was really hoping for something, that would feel like this is a salutor that has attached itself to resentment, to anger. Maybe it's more aggressive and less defensive than others, or maybe it has a specific attack it can do that's different than others. Now, I cannot compare it to any other salutors or boss fights, as I have not experienced them, but I'm not going to say I have the highest of hopes for what those will entail. And I mean, I'm happy to be wrong. Like I said, when I make a video later on about this game, I will report to you as to, are the boss fights varied? Are the environments varied? What has really changed, in my opinion, and, my knowledge of the game. But yeah, I will say overall the boss fight was difficult, but kind of underwhelming just for the lack of unique mechanics and ideas that it brought to the table. There is one that was kind of interesting. It's kind of like, because this is a wild salutor, it almost acts like a wild animal. The more damage it takes, the more aggressive it becomes, and the less defense focused it is, meaning it does more damage, but it also takes more damage, which was kind of cool, but can also mean if you're not careful, it could probably one-shot you in the last, portion of the boss fight, because suddenly it's attacking way more aggressively, hitting harder, and if you're not prepared for that, suddenly you go down and you're just like, why did I just spend, the, say, 5 minutes getting it to such a low health bar just for it to one-shot me? And that didn't feel great. It didn't do that to me in the first fight, and I'm hoping it doesn't happen in later ones, but I could see that being a potential. So all in all, combat feels okay, not great, but I understand that it will get more complex and more interesting as I add more modifiers, as I unlock more attack skills, and I'm really hoping that it kind of finds its footing outside of the prologue, but we'll see about that. With all that being said, let's get into a few of the more minor gripes or any issues that I might have had with the game. There were a couple small gripes I had with the game, one being that no matter what I did, unless I put my cursor on a completely separate monitor, meaning if you only have one monitor to play with, your cursor will always be there, especially during cutscenes, and I don't know if it'll show up in recording. I can't remember if I put on the setting to remove my cursor from the recording, but while I was playing the game, my cursor was present at all times, and I kind of had to move it in the corner, but then if I moved it too far, it was just in the dark blackness, which just made it contrast even more. It was just like, I don't know how difficult it is to remove a cursor for a cutscene, so I'm not trying to say, oh, the devs need to do this. It was just kind of one of those, it's a nice quality of life thing. It's not, harming my enjoyment of the game, it's just kind of taking me out of that immersion and reminding me that this is a game, this is a cutscene, all that stuff. And my eye is just sometimes drawn to the cursor, which is partially a me thing, but it would be nice if it was just, not there. Another minor gripe, and again, this did not really hinder my enjoyment of the game so much as kind of take me out of it in some way, was the difference in the voice acting quality. Now, the main character who plays Victor does a fantastic job. They really cared, and I mean, I imagine with all the lines they had to record, they really tried their hardest to give a good performance. I did notice the actor who plays Rasputin kept calling him Victor with a clear V sound, so I don't know if that was just a choice as to what Rasputin would do, or if that was a mistake on the voice actor's part, or if that will change. But it was weird hearing him say Victor, like very clearly Victor, not Victor, which, you know, has less of an emphasis on the V sound. So yeah, just strange choices there. And I've noticed the side characters, they are really hit and miss in terms of the voice quality. And I understand, you know, you're probably not getting paid a lot for this. It might even have been some of the dev team recording some lines. It's just some of the quality and like emotion and direction was not there for those side characters and their dialogue. So that kind of felt a little worse at times. Again, depending on the NPCs, I'm not going to name particular ones. It's just some of them didn't sound as good as others. So mildly immersion breaking, but again, nothing that I would say is a detriment or a reason not to pick up this game. Here at the end, I just wanted to talk about a couple miscellaneous things, you know, like the graphics, the sound design, stuff like that. So let's start out with the graphics. Honestly, they look pretty good. It's kind of, you know, drab, a lot of browns, a lot of grays, but I mean, it's, you know, early 1900s Warsaw. Like, this doesn't strike me as a time when you're going to see a whole bunch of vibrant colors, a whole bunch of happy people, because this was a miserable time in history, and presumably in the game as well. So the graphics were fine, they were passable, that I would say is terrible by any means, but it was kind of there, and it did its job, so I unfortunately don't have too much to say. I didn't notice any graphical issues, which was nice, and everything looked, you know, like it fit in. It was just very monotone colors, which I totally understand, and I do hope it gets maybe a little more colorful, at least a little more diverse as the game goes on. One more thing to throw here in the miscellaneous section that I almost forgot about, I'm not going to lie, is the game's accessibility options. So luckily for me, and luckily for a lot of players, it does have completely rebindable keyboard controls and full controller support at the time of recording. I do not know if those controller key mappings are rebindable, as I did not test it. I did not use controller for this because it kind of felt weird to use a controller for an isometric RPG, in my opinion, but that's just me. This has always felt like a very mouse and keyboard kind of thing. But having those rebindable controls means it's easier for someone to kind of, you know, put it on maybe one portion of the keyboard, or decide, hey, I don't like the position my hand has to be in pushing all of these buttons. They can figure it out for themselves, or if something doesn't make sense to them, they can put it in a more familiar position, which I think is fantastic. I'm always going to support rebindable controls. And the other options that the game has, which are nice, you know, you can control individual graphics settings, audio settings, all that kind of stuff, which is always good because this doesn't seem like a super graphically or PC intensive game, but I do worry about, you know, lower end systems not being able to turn things down to a level that allows them to run it comfortably. I don't think that'll be an issue with the Thaumaturge. So yeah, I wanted to make sure I threw that in there right here at the end. So thank you everyone for listening, and let's wrap up the video. So yeah, there is a look at the Thaumaturge. It's honestly a really promising RPG. Now, all in all, this was a really fun prologue, and I wish I had more time to play it before the full release, but like I said, I have a pretty packed schedule, and I wanted to make sure I could record, script, you know, edit, get the video out on time for the day of release, so that you can see it. I will admit, I don't play a lot of isometric RPGs, and I don't play a lot of detective games. So I'm also not normally a fan of turn-based RPGs. I'm also not normally a fan of turn-based combat. In spite of all of that, I had a really fun time with this game. Now, I think the closest thing I could compare it to, and what it'll likely get compared to a lot, is Disco Elysium. I have not played Disco Elysium, for full disclosure, but I know it's like, you know, detective investigation game where you're fighting the voices in your head. And this, to me, is kind of like reminiscent of that system where we're deciding what flaws you want to lean into, where you're deciding what direction Victor is gonna go. Honestly, again, a lot of fun. I will say this feels like a AA title, and I'm okay with that. I think it's a great title for the price. The voice acting may get you, though. I had a lot of fun with this. Thank you once again to Keymailer and 11-Bit Studios. This is not normally the type of game I would, you know, willingly play, but your game looked really interesting, and I appreciate you giving me a review code. I can't wait to play more of it. So ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond, thank you so much for being here. If you stuck through the whole video, please make sure to comment, like, subscribe. Let me know what you think about the Thaumaturge. Let me know if you're going to pick it up, and if you do, let me know what you think about the game. I'm sure I'll have a little bit more time in it by the time this video goes up, hopefully. We'll see about that. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.